You. There we are.
So, just kind of like before we start, I kind of
Uh-huh.
wanted to tell you a little bit more about what this project is, because I
Okay.
know over kind of like our messaging, I was talking to you about how this is a project for junior athletes to kind of learn those mental performance skills so that they can kind of overcome pressure and anxiety and all of those kind of hindrances in their mental game. So, this project is called the Salus Project, Salus being Latin for mental wellness.
Okay.
And I'm kind of just trying to interview sports psychologists, interview mental performance professionals, and get those little, I guess, techniques and like helpful advice for all of these junior athletes to kind of learn from. So
Okay.
all of these kind of recordings, all of these sessions, I have them in a like a database, and junior athletes can go look at them and kind of learn from sports psychologists without having to um like if they're not confident enough to kind of book a session, they
Okay.
can learn from sports psychologists like this.
Okay. Makes sense.
So I just had a couple of questions for you. I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Okay.
But just kind of as a little bit of context, can you tell me a little bit about your career? Like, how is it that you kind of started as a sports psychologist? What kind of led you to this mental performance field?
Yeah. It's for me it was not a path that I had in mind in the beginning. So um I began first interested in like biological psychology, and that was in a research laboratory in as an undergraduate, and then I went into a doctorate in clinical psych. So I had planned to, just be doing like either assessment and testing and research and therapies, all those kinds of pieces. But then because one of like the area that I became really invested in and really smart in was around using brain data, or specifically the electroencephalography or the EEG, to understand like people's experiences, and started doing research around, what does that look like in a diagnostic? And then that led to also a bit of awareness around performance attributes. So how did the brains look different of people who are high performers versus just average folks? And I got hired by a startup company to develop some technology to do those, to measure, and they were trying to create a product to sell to the masses. And athletes and athlete populations were part of that storyline, both from a data-driven standpoint of what do high performers look like from a brain state, and how can we train people to create that, but also from the marketing standpoint. And so that is what really pushed me really strongly into athlete-centric populations. And then that just started to grow from there. And then that's when I went back to school and then did a new specialization in sports psychology. And now, after that, even after that startup went away, got acquired, that's been the probably a big focus of the clients that I work with are people who are either athletes or high performers in some domain. Yeah, so it's kind of a weird way to land there. It was never anything that I said, "Oh, I think I want to work with this group," or "I think I want to be one of those people." It just kind of happened that way.
And just like going with the flow, and then
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
kind of where you ended up.
Yep, exactly. It was never planned, and just the way the path went.
Yeah, I did a little bit of research on that product that you guys were
Okay.
uh kind of developing.
Uh-huh.
So that was the NeuroPeak, right? The NeuroPeak Pro.
It was no, it was called the Versus, is what it ended
Versus.
up being, the final product. And there were several iterations of Brain Sport, and there were various names of earlier versions. But anyway, it ended up being Versus, was the landing name. Yeah, I think it's still marketed and sold by a different company now called Evoke Neuroscience.
Okay. So in the lab, kind of, I guess, looking at those high performance,
Hmm.
like the neurofeedback from high performers,
Hmm.
like, kind of, can you walk me through what exactly is happening inside those high performers' brain? Like what is it that they're doing differently in those make or break moments that maybe your average athlete or your average performer isn't able to do?
Yeah. So, as you might guess, it's not always the same thing, but there are a couple of things that stand out. One is, well, there's a bunch of different angles. Let me try and think about this to be concise to what's most likely happening. The biggest differentiator is how they manage stressors. So having the capacity to either regulate through or even decrease the physiological arousal when in a high pressure environment, and also in environments where there's less pressure, like maybe it's just a practice or it's, this is no big deal, it's not a big event or anything like that, being able to increase the amount of cognitive, I'll call it cognitive arousal, but the brain engagement. So I think the biggest thing is that high performers tend to have an increased capacity for awareness of what brain state to be in. So, like this requires high focus. They're like, okay, they have a better ability to get into a focused state, or this particular environment is high stakes, lots of pressure. They have a higher capacity to regulate or to not allow that increased arousal to negatively impact their behavior or their cognitive ability. So I think that's the primary difference, is not that, when we think about regular people doing, whatever they do for work, it's not that the elite performers do something completely different. They just have an increased capacity to do that thing. So it's either faster, like they can get in that state faster, or they can manage the thoughts and the feelings while experiencing those higher stakes at a higher degree. So they do the same thing that we do, that as non-elite performers might do, but they do it just at a better level. And that the question becomes, and what we don't know the answer to is, are those does the training of being an athlete or being, training to be a high performer, is that what develops that skill? Or is that something that they naturally have a talent for and develop, and then that's what allows them to be the elite performer? So we don't know which comes first, but definitely that's a piece of the equation, is just being able to better regulate and increased awareness also. That's the other piece. They have a way better, if I say, how are you feeling today? You might go, I'm okay, I feel fine. But the higher the capacity of, like, oh, I feel good here. My leg's a little tired. My cognition's a little off. Just a higher, heightened sense of awareness.
Kind of talking about how like the question is now kind of turning into whether like that kind of, I guess, like cognition,
Hmm.
is it trainable and that's how they become like elite athletes, or do they have a knack for that? And then like do they have a knack for it, and is does that kind of lead to like that ability, that increased
Yeah,
cognition? So what are
yeah,
your opinions on that? Like how much
yeah,
of this of that kind of state do you think is trainable? And how much do you think is simply just because like they're wired for it?
yeah. I think, to the earlier point, I think we don't know the answer, but my opinion is that both are true. There are some people who just have a natural talent. I mean, you can take any, athletic analogy that you like of any sport and say, that person just has raw talent. And then there has to be some coaching and training and development to really turn it into a skill set. And then there are other people who maybe aren't naturally as, raw talent, but they work hard. They're smart about it. They play a smart game or whatever. So I think the answer, as it comes to like sports psychology and brain development and all those things, I think the answer is probably both are true, and absolutely it's trainable. The ideal situation is you have a natural knack for it and you train it to a high degree. That's probably the person who's at the, at the top of the podium. And then the people who have one or the other capacity, can certainly, like we see this all the time. There are plenty of athletes. These are the stories that we, gravitate to in news cycles and things like that, of somebody who overcome adversity, or they have, a natural hardship of some sort, or a physical injury or disability even, and they overcome that through perseverance and hard work. So even from the sports psychology or the brain training standpoint, absolutely you can train it. And probably some people are just wired a little bit better than others, and that's ultimately who you want to be, is the person who is wired for it, and you have good training ability, because that's, now you got the best of both.
Kind of like a, yeah, best of both worlds, right? Like
Exactly.
mixing that talent with that hard work.
Exactly.
So then to develop it, do you think there is any specific protocol or drill? Maybe something that you use to kind of help athletes or high performers get to that state? Like what should we as athletes be trying to kind of
Yeah.
get there?
Yeah, we should be really, I think, there's several pieces to it, and there's a lot of ways to get to, there's many right answers, but I think the first big concept is around awareness. If like we just have to start creating increased awareness about what is our experience, both from a physical standpoint, like studying the game, developing, the coaching side of our sport, but then also on the physical side, beyond strength and conditioning, it's the same, but from a mental standpoint. So like having awareness of what is my experience, what are the things that I do that make that experience feel better, feel worse. We get oftentimes also very tied up in outcome metrics versus the process metrics. And that's another piece that I think is, really prime opportunity for us to be a positive influence as as an athlete, developing that process, but also as a sports psych, saying, what are the processes? Let's focus on the process, which increases performance, and then increased performance makes it more likely that we achieve our outcome goal, rather than just saying, like, I want to be the best. Okay, well, what does that even mean, right? I mean, like, that's hard to get to that place. So, kind of bringing it back into the process is I think where the real juice is.
Yeah, I think that's a common theme with all of the people that I've spoken to before. They
Hmm.
usually kind of all gravitate back to focusing on the process rather than the outcome.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
and do you think that that's where people kind of tend to get it wrong? Like they focus on the outcome
Yeah,
a little bit too much rather than focusing
yeah.
on the process?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because when we focus on the outcome, we're future oriented. That creates anxiety. That increased pressure, and also, let's just even if it's a reasonable outcome goal. I want to win the championship this year, and I'm good enough to win the championship. So that becomes my goal. Well, then if today I go train, and we don't always have good days, so we have off days, we have good days, we have days in the middle. But if I go out today for this thing that I want to achieve at the end of the year, I'm not there yet. So that means today I'm a failure. And then tomorrow I go train and I have a vision on this thing. I'm comparing myself to this outcome and I'm a failure. And then I create the next day. So we're reinforcing I'm not good enough, and we're increasing our anxiety because we're going, oh, I'm not good enough yet. I need to work harder. Like some of that can be very motivational, but for after a period of time, it starts to weigh us down rather than build us up. So having an outcome goal, having an expectation, that's great. That puts us in the direction saying, I want to win the championship. Great. What do I need to do to win the championship? Okay, you need to be this fast, this strong, this many points, that capacity or skill, whatever it is. Okay, great. Now what do I need to do today to get closer to that performance, to get more points, to get faster, to get stronger, to whatever that sport is? That's what we can do every day. And so I can walk away every single day building confidence, building my strengths, so to speak, by just saying, I'm doing the thing, I'm doing the process in order to get to that performance, because outcomes also depend on a whole bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with you. Your competition, maybe the weather, maybe all sorts of things are factors as it relates to outcomes that are not about you.
Typically, when people tell me about that process versus outcome kind of mindset, I like to challenge them with like, I guess a little bit of like I like to play devil's advocate, right?
Okay.
So I know that the outcome we should be focusing on that the process, right?
Yep.
And that's what common sense tells us, that's what sports psychology tells us, and that's what we're supposed to do in order to grow as athletes.
Okay.
Um, of course, sometimes in competition, like we suffer a pretty bad loss.
Yep.
So how do you deal with it during the fact? because at that point, it just kind of feels like the outcome of that
Hmm.
tournament is like the biggest thing ever. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
Like it's just like the end of the world. How do you kind of deal with that and grow afterwards?
Yeah. So if we were focused on our processes, it stings. Like winning is better than losing, right? We all want that and we want to get to that thing. But this is the when we can walk away. And we say this all the time in cliches. You hear it on, whether you're at, a T-ball or, little league footballers or whatever, we hear it's like, this notion that did you try your best? And this kind of notion. So if we're focused in the process, I can show up, do my process and do it well and walk away going, I did the thing. Hopefully I won, but if I didn't, that stings. But I also know that there was nothing I could have done differently to make it the outcome. I just got beat. And some days that's because we having a bad day. Sometimes it's because the other guy's just better than us. There's all sorts of those variables, but because we were focused in the process, that allows us to critique what did I do? What was my role in that win or loss? And that's why sometimes we can walk away from a really spectacular win and in the interview afterwards go, I could have done better. I should have focused on this. I could have done that. All those kinds of pieces. And yeah, we won. Great. Good for us. And also we can walk away from a loss going, I did all the right things. We showed up, we fought hard, we were conditioned, we were trained, but it didn't go our way today. And that's why the process is so important because if the outcome is the most important thing, then not only does it sting that we lost, but then we go, what's the point? All that time, all that training, all that practice, whatever it was, it's all worthless. It was for nothing because the only reason we did it was to win have that outcome. And that feels really crappy. So, I mean, and that's also not the point. I mean, again, we all want to win. Yes, the championship is great, but why do we actually show up? And this is where it gets into some of those other sports psychology concepts like motivation and the why, and the fulfillment and the satisfaction of doing the craft and being better at it rather than just measuring wins and losses.
So that outcome kind of mindset is a little bit geared more towards like that short burst motivation. And then the process is like that long-term discipline. It's what kind of keeps you going. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, it can be. It's like certainly if I'm there for the process, then I don't need all of the big milestones to enjoy my sport or to continue to grow and get better at it. Where if it's only about winning, particularly in the beginning, I mean, none of us are winners when we first show up on day one if I've never done this thing before. So if winning is the only thing that drives us, all athletes, no matter what your sport, I mean, take an NBA season or a baseball season or whatever, it is really hard to get, at 500 or higher. Like you will lose sometimes more than you win, and you can still be a phenomenal athlete on a great team or whatever. So, yeah, that's a bit of it. So if we're just focused on the win loss, we're missing really the bulk of it. I mean, yeah, that's again, when we're thinking about a season of competition play, particularly in team sport or something where there's rankings, again, those things matter. To say that they don't matter is to fool ourselves or to try and, we're not being honest with ourselves, but that's not the only thing that matters. And it's not the primary thing that matters. To show up every day needs to be not based on an outcome. Because if I lose yesterday and today and tomorrow and the next day, well, there's not much time before I'm like, maybe this isn't my thing. Maybe I don't want to do it. It takes the joy or the fun or the satisfaction out of it. And that's what we want to, by focusing on process, not only are we diminishing pressure and anxiety in our future state, we're increasing our presence in this moment, which also feels better. It's more rewarding. It's more enjoyable. It's more satisfying to do the thing.
So kind of being present in the moment rather than, I guess, focusing, like enjoying that process, like not
Yes,
being so hung up on whether or not you're going to win or lose, but
100%.
enjoying every single day.
That's right. And this is the only way
Okay.
because I can't enjoy today if my only thing that I'm paying attention to is I want to win the championship that happens at the end of the year. Well, I'm not going to be happy until that happens because I'm not there yet. And so again, it's fine to have that as an outcome goal, but I'd like to enjoy today and I'd like to enjoy tomorrow and the next day too. So we cut ourselves short. We rob ourselves of a lots of enjoyment and satisfaction by only being focused on, moments in the future rather than what's happening right now.
Okay. Well, Dr. Sherlin, I only have three more questions for you.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Um, so we've kind of talked about the athlete,
Uh-huh.
but I feel like that's not really the only part of the equation. Sometimes the parents and sometimes the coaches also like they play a pretty big role in like how somebody has to perform, right? They're kind of like, I guess, the figures of authority in that
Hmm.
space. So what would you say is like the biggest mistake that you see maybe parents or coaches making with younger athletes? How do you see them kind of putting pressure?
Yeah.
And what should they do to fix that? What can they do instead?
Yeah, we could spend a long time talking about this. But to kind of get at the biggest factors, all the things we were just talking about with outcomes, that is a big piece. So while spare us a bunch of time in restating everything that we just talked about, but a coach or trainer or parent should be focused on the did you have fun? Did you get better? Did you do your best? What do you need to do to show up more next time? What would you change about that experience? Not in a judgmental way of you are bad or you did something bad, like avoiding guilt and shame, and instead coming at it from a growth mindset of what'd you do? What was it like? How do you want to improve? But really importantly, especially for young athletes, if if it's not fun, I mean, the reason they're called games for a reason. Like this is like yeah, it's serious and there's a lot of money to be made and there's the business around sport. But the reason we do this is because it challenges us to get better and grow, and that feels good and it's fun. It might be social. We might be into the competition piece, like really leaning into those things. And I think parents and coaches often they forget, why are we doing this? And so if I'm working with a young athlete and I talk with parents, I'm like, why do you want your child or person to be involved in sport? And they usually start by saying something like, oh, they learn about life, they learn life lessons of how to win and lose and how to be a teammate and how to communicate or physical fitness. It's like, okay, well, let's focus on those things rather than how many points did you score or did the team win or lose? Like they get focused on, are you going to get a college scholarship? Are you good enough to this? Are you making that next level? Those can be important conversations, but when that becomes the focus, it starts to demoralize and also it takes the fun out. And then that young athlete is not going to be very interested in listening to what they have to say because it's not supportive. So we do need to challenge, we do need to encourage, we do need to sometimes, you know, um, light a flame under them and motivate them in a like, hey, what do you want here? But ultimately, it has to be that person's decision to show up. And so how do we encourage that? How do we support that rather than project our own desires or what we want as a parent or as a coach? It has to be athlete centric. That's probably however we could define that the best of let it be the athlete who decides.
Otherwise, there's kind of like a discontinuity, right, between I
Yeah,
guess what the parent wants and what the athlete wants, and then it
that's right.
like the
Yeah.
problems start coming.
Yeah, exactly. Because
Um,
now I'm doing it not because I want to do it, but because I don't want to hear my mom or dad give me a hard time, or I don't want the coach to yell at me, or any of those kinds of things. That's the difference in playing to win versus playing to not lose. And we're
mm,
going to be way better, way more engaged, way more willing to put ourselves out there if we're coming from a supported environment rather than a punitive environment.
okay. Um, well, Dr. Sherlin, this is probably like coming up is probably my favorite question of the
Okay.
entire interview.
Okay.
Um, there's this podcast that I like to watch. It's called The Diary of a CEO, and
Okay.
Stephen Bartlett is the guy who kind of runs that podcast. So he has a tradition where for every single guest, he'll ask the previous guest for a question, and the guest that he currently has will answer that question. So
Okay.
before you, um, I spoke to the author of this book. John
Okay.
Gordon,
Okay.
the author of The Energy Bus. So he is a 17-time best-selling author. He writes mental performance content, kind of how to stay positive, how to keep yourself cheerful. And
Okay.
so, in typical John Gordon fashion, he wanted me to ask you the question, how do you stay positive?
Oh, wow. Um, so the shortest version is to say to think about the again, very being much in the present rather than the future, which is anxiety, or the past, which is sadness or depressed kinds of situations, staying in the moment, but also um, asking myself about the narrative that I'm telling myself. So like really paying attention to the story that I'm telling myself in my head. So something happens in the day. Our natural reaction might be like, oh, this stuff always happens to me, or why is that happening to me? Or, like this kind of thing instead of that mindset saying, okay, well, what else is possible? What is the narrative? Like, I think that person cut me off and I'm mad at them. Well, maybe they didn't even see me. Maybe it's not about me. So, like, really trying to get out of my personal interpretation of what's happening and instead say, okay, well, that happened. What do I want to do with that? Now what? So, like, really freeing up our attachment to any particular narrative of what's happening and realizing that I can't control what's happening in reality, like in the world. Like, I have no control over that. But what I can control is my experience as I move through it. So again, the guy cuts me off on the way to work today, or I miss that shot, or I goof up in a test that I'm taking or performing. It's like, okay, what do you want to happen next? The choices are I can be upset and mad and whatever, or not. I can learn from it. Like I have like realizing that I ultimately have the control over what I choose to experience, but I don't have control to choose what's happening. So I think that's probably the thing that both for myself, but also what I try to teach others is like, okay, yeah, that happened. Let's accept that as the reality. Now, what do you want to do with that? I mean, this is a phrase that I ask athletes, I don't know, multiple times in a session. Every time we have an awareness, what do you want to do with that? Well, I'd like to not be bothered by it, or I'd like to use it as motivation. Okay, well, how do we do that? Let's lean into that. So I think that's probably the big piece is realizing you get to interpret, or I get to interpret the reality that's happening.
I think when you were kind of talking about not letting it bother you,
Hmm.
I immediately thought of like this verse from Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. So he says that I don't know the exact like quote,
Yeah.
um, but he says that you're only going to be harmed by what you let harm you.
Okay.
And so your attitude and like your perception of what happens, that's what's going to kind of write your own narrative. There's a reality and then there's your narrative. And reality can only harm you if you let it.
That's right. And
Dr.
oftentimes
Sherlin,
what's interesting about that is the reality, the story we're telling ourselves isn't grounded in the reality that we're actually experiencing. And that's I think just so clearly articulated in what you just said. Yeah.
well, Dr. Sherlin, it's been super, super helpful. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for taking the
Absolutely.
time to kind of hop on this call and help all of these junior athletes.
Yeah.
So if anybody kind of wants to connect with your work, maybe book a session with you
Sure.
or learn a little bit more about what you do, where can they kind of find, like, do you
Yeah.
have any socials or like where
Yeah.
can they find your work?
Totally. So our website is sherlinconsultinggroup.com. And then in the socials, I'm at Leslie Sherlin on all of those platforms, and also at Sherlin Consulting are a good way to kind of find us.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Sherlin.
Absolutely. You're
It's
welcome.
actually been
Thank
so
you.
helpful.
Yeah, cool. It's lovely to meet you.
Have
Good
a
luck.
have a great rest of your day.
Okay, you too. Take care.